Hello and welcome. You're listening to another new episode of NMPC Plus. Thank you so much for listening and making us part of your weekly rhythms. My name is Josh. I am the worship pastor at New Mercy Palisades Church, a little church plant that could, and I'm joined today by Pastor Bobe. Hello, Pastor Bobe.
Hello.
And I'm joined by Pastor Key. Hello, Pastor Key.
Hello.
How you guys doing today?
Good.
Bobe, you're back with us after being away last week.
Yes.
You were at a conference.
Yes.
Tell us about it. How was it?
It was a lot of fun, I have to say. It was a lot of fun. I went to a conference called Voice of the Prophets.
Mm-hmm.
Prophetic people, they're different, yo.
Yeah.
They go from like 0 to 100 so fast.
That's
So
true.
if you lose them,
That's true.
you're like, where was I? Or, I mean, at least that's how I felt.
Yeah.
But I really went because I wanted to bring my sister, my youngest sister. So we went together and we went with some other people and it was fun. It was in Virginia, so I got to stay with my I have two younger sisters.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to stay with the middle one, Surby, in their house with their two little children. So that was a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
But I came back refreshed.
Are you a prophet now?
You know, I'm going to say this. Your girl is not no prophet out here, all right?
Yeah.
I may get words here and there, but
Sure.
I sure as heck am not those people that do whatever that they... it's crazy. They just on a different level.
Yeah.
It's just the way they intercede for the nation and, the church. That really is such a key piece to the way they prophesy or what they were sharing with us.
Yeah.
And your girl does not pray like that. I mean, I pray for the church and stuff, but not like that. So,
Sure.
but I came back with a lot actually. Unexpected things, but a lot of good things. So, yeah, I was glad I went.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're glad to have you back, obviously, but while you were away, we had Pastor Key's wife, Rala, with us.
Yeah, I saw that.
Were you able to listen to the podcast at all?
No, I just looked at it.
Yeah, it honestly was so great having her with us. And, I tried to do the thing to not do the obvious thing and all that stuff. But, I mean, even if I did, I'm sure, she would have been awesome and amazing. So, Rala, if you're watching, we miss you. You were awesome last week, and we hope to have you on again, hopefully soon. But that's also a call out to a lot of our other, elders and leaders and deacons.
Yes.
We want to have as many of them on as possible so that
Please.
we can... we can get more voices on here, but
Please.
you're right over there, Pastor Keith.
Please.
My brain is my brain is tired.
Yeah, my brain's a little groggy too. I just finished my semester for seminary.
Wow.
And honestly,
let me ask you something. How close were you?
So I missed my deadline. I missed one of my deadlines by about 15 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm a little bit worried that might not get the best grade on that particular one.
Sure.
But overall, I did the best I could, and just trying to balance all this stuff. And it's kind of like, it's not the first time I've missed deadlines, but I've made it work before. So...
Can I say something?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's when you fix the door. It's those 15 minutes.
What if you put it like that, Pastor Key? Oh, my goodness.
What Pastor Key is referring to is... So after our staff meeting yesterday, I made it known that I had to get to work on my papers and stuff. But before I did, there was just an issue in the office. Our door that's supposed to be hydraulic, close and soft close and all that stuff. It was slamming every time you open and you just let it go and it would slam, and it bothers me. That's the kind of stuff that bothers me. And so I needed to make sure that I fixed it, and I spent 10 or 15 minutes on it. And you're saying that those were the 15 minutes?
Those are the 15 minutes, man.
Why'd you do that to the man?
I said to Josh, I was like, don't you have something to do?
That's just how my brain is. when I feel the impending like doom
yeah.
of having to work,
I totally understand.
I mean,
know.
like that procrastination is something that I just need.
No.
It actually reminds me. Have you guys heard that TED talk about procrastination and how like it's like I forget the exact point of the TED talk, but like ultimately that procrastinators need to procrastinate in order to like in order to find that one little sliver of like hard work or like creativity or all that stuff.
Interesting.
Yeah, I'm not saying that's me, but I'm gonna claim it. I'm gonna claim that is me. But hey, the semester's done. I have to just throw up my hands and be happy with the results and take a break, and then kind of do it all over again in the fall. But for now, I'm looking ahead. I'm looking forward to some golf this season. But not just golf, like also doing more ministry. I'm getting to meet with a lot of people in our church, just having one-on-ones, lunches, and all that stuff. And it's really good. I'm honestly so happy that I get to be doing that stuff, and I'm going to look forward to more opportunities to have those kinds of meetings. So. I'm just so happy, that the semester is over.
Yeah.
I know, finally. Praise the Lord.
Yeah. Wow, my brain is so fried right now.
Yeah,
okay,
me too, man.
we're gonna get into it right away. So here's what I thought we could do today. We're gonna do our sermon convo, kind of as usual, and then I wanted to leave some time on the back end of our conversation today to maybe talk a little bit about something that came up in a conversation over dinner that I had with a bunch of brothers a couple Saturdays ago. I just kind of wanted to get your take on it. And then also towards the very, very end of the podcast, I wanted to kind of announce and, put something out there for the future of this podcast. Nice. So there's a few things on the docket today, a few things on the agenda. So probably best that we just jump right into it. Pastor Key, you gave the message this past Sunday, and this is actually the start of our new sermon series called "What Do You Mean, Jesus?" You gave a bit of an intro about the sermon series itself, and then you gave the message. As usual, I give you the floor for that refresher. Also, if you could give us sort of like that backdrop of the context of the sermon series again, just so that we're all on the same page. So Pastor Key, please take it away.
Yeah, so the series is What Do You Mean, Jesus? Right? And that's something that I'm sure everybody who's read the Bible or read Jesus doing what he does, huh?
Yeah.
What do you mean?
I still say that every day.
Yeah.
What do you mean, Jesus?
And so but it's not simply... He's not just doing that just to be obscure or opaque. I think there's deep truths that, we just don't get because we're dumb.
Right.
Right. And we just need to mine it a little bit more. And these truths, we want to wake up to these truths, right? Because then as we wake up to these deeper truths that he's teaching us, it'll lead to flourishing in life and deeper understanding of reality and things like that. So that's kind of the gist of the series. The sermon itself, I had a hard time picking, like, man, what do I talk about? What's a good first one? And I landed on talking about the first miracle or sign that Jesus does, recorded in the book of John, the Gospel of John. And that was the turning of water into wine. And it was fairly simple. I just went into why he did that, what was that sign pointing to? And the main point was he was pointing to the fact that he's all about joy, right? Wine in the Old Testament language overflowing with this idea that wine and joy are synonymous. Wine is a powerful metaphor and symbol for the overflowing of joy, especially in the end times, right? That's a symbol that they use. And so Jesus was just declaring, hey, I'm not about rules. I'm not about that. The core of my ministry, the core of who I am is about overflowing joy for you guys. And then after I made that point, I just kind of looked at some other aspects of that sign that are meaningful to us, and that was basically the sermon.
Yeah. Speaking of, I'm reminded of. Remember last week the message about Ruth and Naomi, and how someone came up to you and was like, "I'll be your Naomi."
Oh no!
So after the message,
I don't know if I want to hear this.
Why?
So after the message, I won't say who or the multiple people that did it. But after the message, you know how like Pastor Key was talking about the symbolism of wine and how wine sort of equals joy. And so after the message, a few people come up to me and be like, "So we're going to have some wine because we need more joy up in our church." And there was a part of me that like obviously I laughed, but then there was a deeper part of me like, you sinner, but I'm with you. I'll bring it. And so it's interesting. Could you talk a little bit more about why? Because like we've talked in our meetings about where we want to take this series and what we want to do with it, and kind of in the same way that we looked at multiple points with our last series. We looked at multiple points of David's life to try to decipher something about his life, kind of the circumstances of this particular story, so that we understand maybe a newer aspect of our theme. And so in the same way, we're going to kind of look at multiple points of Jesus's own ministry and kind of do all that stuff, right? But the truth is you can go anywhere with that, and you can start anywhere. And so I'm curious to maybe know a little bit more about like the thought process behind like the water to wine, right? Because to me, and maybe this is just like my own reading of the Bible, kind of my interacting with it, but it's almost as if Jesus himself doesn't want that to be the start of his ministry, right? Do you know what I'm talking about? Like if it's almost as if when you read the Bible and like you go and you're before Jesus in heaven, and you'd be like, "Hey Jesus, what was the start of your ministry?" It's almost as if he would want to be like, it was the Sermon on the Mount, it was the Beatitudes, it was blessed are the poor in spirit, like it was blessed are the peacemakers. It was that. It wasn't when my mother told me that I had to turn water to wine, and so, but I'm curious as to your logic, maybe your thinking, as to starting there. Like, did it have to be, in your mind, was there something more special, more particular about it starting with that story particularly, as opposed to, maybe it's, I'm also thinking about like in Luke, in which the only time we see Jesus in a form not of an adult but as a teenager, as a boy, right? You can go there. You can go when Jesus is in the temple and he opens the scroll and he reads from the portion of the scroll that ultimately, like, it's like blasphemy to everyone else, right? Like, you could start so many different places. And I'm curious to know, like, what was the thought process behind finding that particular start?
So I was struggling, like I said, where should I start?
Sure.
I was thinking of just flipping to a page and just picking one. But I really, as I was going through all the different stories and parables and miracles that he does, I felt the Spirit actually leading me to this one. And I was like, why this one? Because number one, it's a weird one. Number two, I don't know what to say about it. You know what I mean? What am I supposed to say about this thing?
Yeah, for sure.
But then as I read it, I realized the gospel writer, John, he includes it and says specifically about it, this was the first of the signs through which Jesus revealed his glory. And at that point, I was like, I think there's something to that. And also because it dovetails perfectly with our theme, because the whole point of the sign, right, the miracle, and that's why the gospel writer uses the word sign, because it's not just the miracle; it's pointing to something else. And our theme is, what do you mean, Jesus, by this thing? And so I saw that as a good paradigmatic example of what we're trying to do. Right? We're going to look at this miracle. The writer of John says there's more to it than meets the eye. What is that thing? And I felt like, this works well for a good start for a series. That's basically it.
Yeah.
And also, just on my personal side, I was just like, what does he really mean by this? Especially this story.
Sure,
You know what I mean? Like,
sure.
I've always kind of talked about it, like, in the drinking context. I'm like, there's got to be more to it than that. Right. And so just out of my own curiosity, I really want to do a full on research project, deep dive into what he meant. And I learned a lot, actually, personally. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about you, Pastor Bobe? As you kind of encountered the message for yourself, was there anything that kind of stood out to you immediately about the message? Anything that kind of struck you as you were listening to it?
I think that part about joy, because I don't think I've ever heard it shared in that way with the wine. Yeah. I don't know. I'm recognizing more and more that maybe not just with this one, but just even with the parables, right? You know how Jesus says, let those who hear, what is it? If you get it, you get it.
those
But if you
ears to
don't,
hear.
but you don't, right? And the more I read the Gospels, especially, I feel like there's always something deeper. And oftentimes we just stay on the surface level. And so when you were talking about that joy portion, I was like, oh, yeah. Yeah, I never thought about looking at this thinking anything more than just, oh, this is what Jesus did. Yeah, so that's really, that was really striking to me.
Yeah. I mean, speaking to the cult, all of the different cultural implications, I think, Pastor Key, you do this really well. I really kind of love how you take these kinds of turns and these little lanes that you take into the messages. But I think maybe before this past Sunday's sermon, I don't know that I really considered all of the different cultural implications found in that particular story of the Bible, right? Just as I kind of go through, from start to finish, there is the idea that number one, that when you run out of wine, that's like a really big deal. Well, actually, number one, the wedding, the whole wedding feast, the celebration, it's very different from contemporary and Western society, the way we celebrate weddings. We do a couple hours, they do a couple days, weeks, they'll do a whole month, that's number one. The other thing that was really interesting to me was the idea that when you finally run out of wine, it's not just, oh, poo, it's the party's over, but it's a really huge, cultural, I think cultural faux pas. You right. Use the term. That's another thing that was really interesting to me. I had to actively stop myself from thinking about all these different branches of thought. Another one is why Mary would turn to Jesus at all, right? I thought that was a really interesting kind of point in the message, in which it might have been because Joseph, Mary's husband, might have been dead for a little bit, and the only person left to kind of take up the mantle of responsibility is the oldest son, who just happened to be Jesus. So all of these different places for me were really interesting. I guess my question to you guys is out of all of those things, and maybe perhaps there's another thing that I'm not mentioning right now, what are those things for you that as a hearer of the message, you think, this is a pretty, some of the top two or three cultural implications, right? Because it's not just that it's cool, and it's not just that it kind of scratches that little place in our brains as pastors where we're like Bible nerds, right? It's not just that, right? But like these cultural implications have some kind of a spiritual implication as to our understanding of the Bible. So like, if I'm just like a regular listener of this message and I'm not a pastor, right? In your mind, like what are some of the bigger things that I should walk away with when it comes to this message? And that's for the both of you.
Yeah, that's Bobby.
Jesus likes a good party.
See, that's why she went first. That's all we need to say, man.
Jesus likes a good party. No, but I think it's to the point of like celebration is an important aspect of the Christian faith. It's a part of the culture, and I think a lot of times we're good at being solemn or being guilty, or like pointing out those types of things in the passages, like, oh, you're a sinner, or you're whatever. I'm not saying like that those things aren't true or that we shouldn't preach about those things, but I think relatively the aspect of celebration, the culture of celebration that Jesus lived in is not very much shared. And so I think if we think about our faith, it's not just this, it's always bad, it's always sad type of situation, but there is joy. I think what's interesting is, like glory is always tied to joy, like in the word. And, it says, you just said it, like these signs and wonder, like this was the first that to show his glory, right? Like I think that is such a significant verse when we're talking about the aspect of joy, because God's glory, Jesus's glory, is tied to joy when you look at the scriptures. So, I mean, one line summary: Jesus likes a good party. You should too.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think we're done.
Yeah, I mean, the title of the message itself was Master of the Banquet, referring to Jesus. So, Bobe, I think you're on to something. But Pastor Key, I would, just, help me understand here, right? Because, like, okay, sure, Jesus likes a good party, and wine is supposed to signal, wine is supposed to be a symbol for like the joy that we experience, right? But like another portion of the message that is really important. I mean, another portion of this passage that's super important that we can't just overlook is that, like, Pastor Key, you pointed at the idea of that Jesus says, like, my hour has not come, and when he talks about my hour, the hour, right? Like all throughout his life and ministry, he's essentially talking about his death, the death that he has to die on the cross for our sins, right? And so, okay. So in my mind, then, just trying to make sense of it all, you kind of like put this platter up for inspection. All scattered all along this platter are these different ingredients, right? So you have wine equals joy. We have like, this isn't just a miracle, but this is also a sign. You have my hour has not come. My hour really means Jesus' death. You have Jesus is the master of the banquet. You have all of these different things. And I think to someone who's maybe not as keen an observer as you, Pastor Key, or you, Pastor Bobe, right? Someone who's not as keen, we see all those different ingredients, but they're still so separate to me, right? Because, like, let me say it another way. Like, I've talked to a lot of people, and I myself for years, especially growing up as a young Christian, I read this story and it's nothing more than Jesus is able to turn water into wine. And it kind of joins the ranks of all of these other crazy, wonderful things that Jesus does, like healing the blind and casting out demons and healing the lame, and all, like, it kind of just get scattered in the ranks of all of these things. But we're saying that this has a deeper significance than just it being how cool is Jesus turning water to wine. Yeah. Right. So help me here. I think I see all the ingredients, but what kind of a dish are you making here?
Yeah, I mean, there's as you're talking, I'm like, there's about 5 different things we can talk about
for
here.
For sure.
So the writers of these stories, and again, they're not making them up, right? They're passing down stories and accounts and eyewitness testimony of things that have happened. But as they're doing that, they're also giving it context. They're also trying to, and they're recording because it means something, right? And so I think even those examples that you said, when he heals the blind, when he calms a storm and this and that, on the one hand, we, just as a casual reader, it can be just, these are just things that Jesus did, right? But all those were recorded actually, part because of what they did, but also partly because of what they pointed to. And so, for example, one of the things I said is, and I took this from another pastor, it's never about the miracles themselves or the naked fact of the power. It's about the redemptive purposes of the miracles, right? And so the calming of the storm, it's not just him calming the storm and flexing his power. It's showing that he has power over creation. And where does that point you to? Right? That points you to God. Same thing with healing. Oh man, this guy is a physician. He's one who heals, who binds up our wounds. Where in the Old Testament do we find somebody like that? And then it kind of points to God. And so with the wine, there has to be something. It's not just us digging for something that's not there. Like, when we're in college, we have to BS our way through papers.
Sure.
Right?
Or seminary.
Or seminary, you know what I mean? There's stuff really there, and the story is being conveyed to us to show us, hey, this story is meaningful. Yeah. And one of the things we also have to remember is these stories are being passed down, but it's not just they're throwing a scroll at them, said, read and learn on your own. As they're passing these stories down, they're asking questions. Oh, hey, what was this story about? And, that's kind of why in the Bible, Paul talks about the fact that there's teachers that are necessary to help unpack some of these things so that we really can extract the life force. That's not the right word. The juice out of it, maybe. Sure.
Yeah. The grapes.
The grapes
that turn into wine. Yeah.
One thing I will say, though, and you alluded to this right at the beginning of, when you're asking this question. So the reason why I spend so much time actually painting the cultural context of a lot of this stuff is because, at least for me, and I hope this is true for other people, when I hear a pastor doing that, he makes or she makes the story come to life for me. And my hope is, especially stories like this, sometimes you can read it and it just seems like a fairy tale. It almost seems just, it's just a story that somebody made up. But when you get into the actual history and the context, the reason why I do that is because I want people to realize this really happened. And I want it to come to life for them. But also I want them not to just come at it. And this is where what we learned in seminary, like there's two things. There's exegesis and there's eisegesis, right? Exegesis is looking at the text in its own context and learning what it's actually saying. Eisegesis is us using our own cultural lens and looking at the story and interpreting it however we want, right? And I want people to be good exegetes. And hopefully by arming them with these cultural things, they'll never be able to look at that story the same again. And they will have the arsenal and the resources they need to look at that story and to appropriate it from it, the actual spiritual truths that we should be getting from it. Yeah. Because I think too many times the Bible is hijacked with, this is a nice verse. I think this is what this means for me. And so that's what it means for me.
Sure.
It's like, no, that's not what it means at all.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'd actually like to press into that, for both of you guys. That is a more common phenomena than we'd like to admit, right? The idea that we read something, we think we know what it means, and then we'll just start to live our life with that proposed interpretation of a scripture, but we're not exactly then doing the harder work to challenge and to ask the deeper questions and to ask what it means culturally and all that stuff. So like, okay, so then for this message particularly, right, or any message, frankly, maybe we could just talk about it as, for all of the messages coming up, especially when it comes to Jesus particularly, right? Because so much of, so many so-called, I hate to use the words, the so-called, like I'm looking down on people, but a lot of people who try to do biblical interpretation will take Jesus's miracles and just make it about anything that they want to make.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So maybe, ripping ourselves away from this one message particularly, and maybe as just like a motivation or some kind of a methodology between the three of us as we try to do this series well, right? So like, how do we continue to avoid being people that do eisegesis rather than exegesis? How do we avoid that phenomena where we go, oh, I think this is what the Bible means, and then we just run with it without ever challenging it, right? Like, how do we avoid those kinds of mistakes as believers, as pastors, as Christians, whether it's for our church specifically or whether it's for the church, like the Big C church? Like, what are some first things that you go to?
Pastor Bobe.
I guess to ask it another way, just maybe I can make it a little bit easier. To ask it another way, when you read the Bible for yourself, right, Pastor Key, when you were reading this passage in the Bible, and Pastor Bobe, for you, when you read the Bible for yourself, do you have any like go-to thoughts, motives, methods, things that you do to make sure that you're not doing eisegesis? Questions that you ask yourselves, like coaching tips or whatever, to make sure that you're not doing eisegesis, that you're not just running with any old interpretation of the Bible that you want particularly?
I just try to remember that Jesus, or, the Bible wasn't written in the 21st century. So that there are like different cultural implications that go with this, right? Like, the hot ticket stuff in the Bible is like women and teaching and stuff like that, right? So when I read the Bible, generally I'm not actively thinking about it because I guess like it's easier to say that in the Old Testament, honestly. You know what I mean? Like, because they're talking about kings and whatever, and it's just like an obvious thing that this was not written in our time. So you have to try and like remember the things that were talked about in the previous chapters so that, the things that you're continuing to read make sense. And there are more obvious things that are very different from us, right? Like, we don't live in no desert. Like, we don't live in like so it's, even settings wise, it's a little bit different. But maybe because like the Gospels feel so so familiar to us, we can kind of take it in this way, kind of like, so I mean, if I'm just talking about when I'm reading like the gospel account, I don't really have a lot of different methods. I just read it and then I say, Holy Spirit, what do you want? Like, what do you want me to know? And then I kind of go there. Like, start there with like, it's always like the one thing that pops out randomly.
Sure.
You know what I mean? That kind of takes me. And when that one thing pops out at you and you latch onto a question of, oh, what is this about? Or why did Jesus say it like this? Right? Then I do the research. Yeah. But never, I don't think immediately I take it in my own brain first. Yeah. I think that's like when something pops out at me, I always check it with the word. And I try not to take it first. But then there's like general things too. Cause like, I think like when you read the Bible, of course there's like all these culture stuff and whatever, but there's also personal things that we can take away that doesn't take away from what actually Jesus was saying or what actually the Bible is saying. So, I mean, those things too, right?
Yeah, I like that because I don't want people to come away thinking, oh my God, I have to be a biblical scholar in order to read the Bible.
Right.
You know what I mean? And the part of me is like, I would say the lion's share of the Bible you can read, and just as a human being, you can probably get most of what it's trying to say.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Otherwise, I'm just like, what's the point of the Bible then?
Sure.
You know? So there is that. But then at the same time, I don't know. There is something to understanding it properly, because if you look in church history, there are too many people who have understood it improperly and put words in God's mouths and literally made cults and caused so much suffering because they didn't do it right. And so there's the give and take there as well. I would say personally for me, a few things that have helped is what Pastor Bobby said is we're in the 21st century. This was written 2,000 years ago. Let's be a little bit careful about the assumptions I'm making, you know, and just that in and of itself kind of keeps you alert to like, oh, maybe I don't understand that exactly correctly, you know, and maybe I should do a little bit of research, you know. And right now, I mean, we're probably in the perfect time because we have access to the web, though admittedly the web is kind of dangerous because there's no filter and there's a lot of people with quack theology.
Sure.
But generally, if you have some safe websites that you go to, like the Bible Project, you'll find fantastic information. What I actually find helpful is, so let's say there's a week where I'm going to read the Bible, right? And let's say I'm going to start, say, the book of Jonah. As an ancient book, the way I would recommend starting, and I recommended this in the class that I taught last year, the Bible reading something like
Reading
that.
the Bible as a disciple.
Yes, that's the title.
I got you.
Thank you. One of the things I said was listen to the Bible Project summary, which is about 6 minutes, 6 to 8 minutes the first day. And then that'll give you all the background and stuff you need in order to appropriate the rest of the book properly. And this is really helpful because, you know, sometimes people always make fun of like Book of Numbers and Deuteronomy and like, oh, those are the painful ones. If you want to get pain, go to the prophets. I mean, prophets are, my goodness. When you get to Isaiah, you start reading this, you're like, what is he saying?
Yeah.
Who is talking here? What just happened? You know what I mean? And this is where, again, why we have Bible teachers. And if you listen to the Bible Project video, I'm so happy that this organization exists. They summarize it so well that when you read the rest of the book of Isaiah, you're like, okay, now I can kind of take things from it because you have this general background, and it becomes all the more powerful for you and all the more useful, the words themselves, because you're not figuring out like, what the heck does this even mean? Yeah.
I echo and I kind of ditto everything that you guys are saying, and just as an encouragement, just something to add on to everything is to remember that, like, as you're reading the Bible, like, God is knowable. Like, not everyone who, like, Jesus didn't mean for you to be a scholar in order for you to understand his heart, his love, his compassion, his mercy, everything. Like every good thing that flows from the Father that is exhibited in Jesus. Like, Jesus didn't have it in his will for you to be a scholar in order for you to receive that. Like, sometimes all you need are, you know, eyes to see, ears to hear, and a heart to receive, and you will receive, right? Like, so, you know, I love that you guys basically said, like, you can, you know, like, you can absolutely take an interpretation from the Bible, and you can absolutely read the Bible for yourself. And if you come to an interpretation, or if you find that one thing on that particular day, as Pastor Bobby said, if you find that one thing on that particular day and it's a blessing to you, that's wonderful. But I think the thing that we can't forget is to go back the next day and see what else you're getting. To go back the day after that, right? Like, you know, a lot of what we're talking about is it's not so much about like how wonderful our interpretation of each of these passages that we're going to look through over the next 5 or 6 weeks or whatever the time domain is, but it's about like, hey, here's what I see today. and here's what I'm preaching about this week. This is not the gospel truth. The gospel truth is in the Bible. Go read it for yourself. But here's what I'm seeing today. You know, what I'm really excited about for this sermon series particularly is that, you know, Pastor Key, again, you're doing the lion's share of the preaching, but eventually we're going to be able to throw our hand in there and kind of take a message or two.
Can't wait.
These are the kinds of series where I think like it's all like I love the more granular the better.
Yeah.
You know what I love to do? I love to look for that one little thing that no one else is looking at, right? I love to look at that like why was it that the waters had to bubble? Like, why couldn't they be stirred? Like, it's like all these little. I like looking for those kinds of things because maybe, just maybe, it helps me understand and see things in a new way. Like Pastor Key, what you did. I honestly, when you talked about and you kind of uncovered the idea that Joseph might have been dead for a while, hence Mary going to Jesus, like that kind of unlocks something in my brain about this passage in particular. Like I have to go back and read it again and again and again to make sure that I'm catching all of those little things, right? So I guess I'm just really excited about where the series is going to go.
Can I throw something in here?
Yeah.
Just along the lines of what we were saying, like you don't need to be a biblical scholar, right? So let's take this wine passage, water turning into wine. Let's say you didn't know any of the cultural history, right? Just from the story itself, when Jesus turns 180 gallons of water into 180 gallons of wine, and the master of the banquet comes out and says, "This is not normal behavior. Usually, you bring the good stuff out first, the bad stuff out last. But he brings the best. He saved the best for now." And just as a human being, if you're in that context, imagine yourself, holy crap!
Yeah.
This is amazing wine. And just how the party probably just took off at that point.
Yeah.
You know, just not knowing anything and just knowing that you've got the heart of what Jesus did there.
Yeah.
You know, and so I feel like I don't want anybody to be like, oh man, I never really understood this passage. If you got that point, then I feel like you got the core of what Jesus was aiming at. So, yeah.
Yeah. Pastor Key, for you, Pastor Bobe, for yourself, do you have, can you forecast maybe some things to look forward to in the coming weeks about like where you might want to go for your messages? Pastor Key, you might have a few, or you might have none. I don't know. Like maybe it's going to take a little bit of time for you to get the next one and then one after that, right? That might be the case, but also for you, Pastor Bobe, like, you know, we have to think about like where we want to go with this series ourselves. Any things to look forward to in the coming weeks with the series?
I'll let Boba go first. I'm sure she's got something.
No. Actually, there's a few that I'm thinking about.
Sure.
But I don't want to say.
Why?
What?
Why?
We won't steal them, we promise.
No. It's just, I'm just debating, like, I don't know, guys. I'm just thinking about stuff. Yeah. I just decided to preach on this series. Like literally yesterday. So I need a little more time to figure out. But I will say I might pick a tough one.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I might.
Okay.
Like a tough thing to unpack.
Okay.
Not necessarily no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
But anyway, yeah.
For me, the couple that I'm excited, excited is the right word. No, I think excited is the right word.
Sure.
Is the Get Behind Me, Satan.
Mm-hmm.
You really gonna do that?
Why, did you want to do that one?
No.
Oh yeah, I want to do that one.
I'm not doing that.
I'm very excited about that one. Maybe the Why Have You Forsaken Me when Jesus on the cross, and then the one where Jesus says, you have to hate your family to follow me. Those are some big ones. Pretty excited about those.
Yeah.
What about you, man?
I've always been, it's no great wisdomful thing to say that the parables are so ripe with like, what do you mean, Jesus, right? I wanna do this thing about the parable of the lost sheep and how it is one in three stories of lostness.
Yes.
That kind of illustrate like you're different in like you're lost for different reasons and you're lost for different in circumstances, and the remedy for how lost you are is different for each circumstance. For years, I read this thing in a commentary or a book. I forget where I read it, but there was a phrase. I think it was a commentary. I was back Bible college, so maybe 10 years ago. I read this phrase, and it never left me. But it was the parable of the lost sheep, and in the commentary, it asked a simple question like, "How do sheep become lost?"
Yeah.
And it just began to say like, sheep, they're not scheming.
They're dumb.
Yeah, sheep are not scheming. They put their head down and they eat little patches of grass. And when they're done with one patch of grass, they move on to another patch of grass. And so the commentary was ultimately saying, how do sheep become lost? One patch of grass at a time. You just sort of find yourself lost.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're not scheming. Sometimes you're just dumb. And you put your head down for too long and you got lost for just one patch of grass at a time.
That's so good.
That's something.
You're giving your whole sermon
I
away.
know. No, but I'm kind of putting it out there partly because I think I might leave that there because I don't know. This is going to be a challenge, and maybe it's right that my semester is over for seminary because I might need like maximum brain power for this particular message.
Nice.
But I've always been drawn to the parable of the shrewd manager.
Oh, I love that one.
Yeah, and
do that one.
if Jesus is always trying to say something through his parables, then the question becomes, what is he trying to say through the picture of this manager who, the English word is shrewd. The actual Hebrew word is, it's not quite shrewd. Like it's cunning. There's wisdom. There's knowledge. Pastor Key, you even talked about this in your message when you talked about the word like oppa.
Oh no!
Like it's not exactly a one-to-one translation. By the way, you guys need to go back and listen to that message and hear that part. It's such a Pastor Key way to do that portion of the message. I don't know. There's a part of me that for years now I've always wanted to take a stab at the parable of the shrewd manager.
Do it.
But it intimidates me.
Do it, man. Maximum brain power. Come on, turn it on.
Yeah.
You know what I was thinking about doing though? I probably won't. I'm probably not gonna, so I'll share it. But the gnashing of teeth.
Oh.
That there will be gnashing of teeth.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a big one.
Yeah, that's
Because I thought it only came out once, but it comes out like multiple times.
Yeah.
And like twice very closely.
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh, this is something.
Yeah.
But that's a
kind
lot.
That's kind of a scary image for me.
Yeah.
Like how much pain must you be in, or feeling of regret must you have, or that you're gnashing your teeth? I mean,
Should I do that one?
Please do it.
I tell people, 정신
By the
차려.
way, gnashing of teeth is connected to hell. By the way, just so you know.
Yeah.
Okay, so your sermon is going to be on hell.
Get it together.
We're gonna have
That's what I was saying.
We're gonna have an all-time.
You don't want to be gnashing no teeth? Get it together. No, I'm kidding. I'm totally kidding, guys.
We're gonna have record attendance that day.
Can you imagine?
Yeah. Anyway, listen. If you're hearing this and if you're starting to get excited, like we're starting to get excited now, that's a good thing because it points to the fact that you have like curiosity in your heart and you have an openness, and I think that's always a better thing, right? Even if you don't have all the understanding or the wisdom in the world, that's always a better thing. So yeah, look, we really encourage you, if you're watching, if you're listening, to look forward to the messages that are, forthcoming. And so with that, I wondered if we might make a turn.
Okay.
And do that second thing that I had on the agenda.
Sure.
A couple Saturdays ago, for those that are unfamiliar, there is a club in our church called the NMPGA. It's a collection of elite level golfers. And by elite level, I mean high handicap to to people that just started the game, to people that just bought club. So we just affectionately call it the NMPGA. There's even a IG Instagram account dedicated to that club. There's a Meet the Players series. It got surprisingly thought out and built out.
With no planning. Like all of a sudden these people just took
no
over.
planning by us.
Yeah.
All we did was we said NMPGA one time in a meeting, and then somebody just ran with it. Right?
It just took off.
I love golf crazies. I'm one of them. I love a fellow golf crazy. In any case, a couple Saturdays ago, we had our first event in our league. What?
No, it's cute.
Are you laughing at the fact that we have a league?
It's cute.
By the way, the NMPGA is just a collection. The league is a competition. Okay, so
아이고야.
y'all better know that real. And your boy got third place. Anyway, a couple Saturdays ago, we had an event. It was a great event, really fun, super fun. And then afterwards, a bunch of us went out to dinner at like a Korean barbecue place. At that dinner, there was an interesting thing that came up. Nothing bad, but I just thought it was super interesting. And I said at the dinner, because I was part of the conversation, that I was like, man, this is something that's going to come up in the podcast. So you really got to listen, right? So I brought it up to you guys before in our staff meeting, but I wanted to kind of say it in this forum to maybe put something out there, right? Try to get there as quickly as possible, but somebody had mentioned something along the lines of New Mercy does a lot of things right. They were very like complimentary of our church, right? So it started with New Mercy does a lot of things right, and then the person was saying something along the lines of if I was in charge, just as a thought experiment, I might revisit the vision. Right. The vision of our church, for those that are unfamiliar, is we say it. I try to say it every week if I can, but we say something akin to "Welcome to New Mercy, a church for the broken, called to restoration." Right. And so what this person was saying was that is that might be something to revisit, to say it one way, right? Because and this was their point. It's if someone comes in through the doors of our church and they hear New Mercy, a church for the broken, called to restoration, there is, in order to take that statement and run with that statement, there is an inherent conceit that has to be made. First, that I am broken, and the second is just like it, that I need restoration, right? In the world that we live in, and this is the point that the person was making, in the world that we live in, when somebody walks into our church, especially someone who is not churched, and what I mean by that is someone who doesn't like have the culture of church in their like bones, and they didn't grow up with the church, so they're like total new person to the faith. They walk in and they go, "What the? I'm not broken." Right? I don't need restoration. I'm just fine, right? And I wondered if I can get your guys' thoughts on that. The idea of number one, it might behoove us to talk about the beginnings, like where that kind of started, where it kind of came from, and also to, if you're up for it, to honestly and earnestly like take our hand or try our hand at like thinking through the vision of the church and asking earnestly, like, how do we feel about that? Like, where are we as a church? Is our church even still at that place, or is there a reworking that is in the works? So I kind of wanted to do that for a little bit if we could. By no means is this a call to action to change the DNA of our community, of our church, of what we do, of everything, right? No means. But this is just a forum. a conversation that we can have
Yeah.
on behalf of some other people.
Yeah, a conversation about how people experience it.
Sure.
And that's totally fine to have because
Sure.
people are going to experience it in different ways. But the first thought my mind went to was how it originated when you were talking about this. And I can share kind of some of that history. So when we launched the original New Mercy Community Church, this was back in 2010. And this was in Hackensack, New Jersey. So this was a church plant. We were formulating the vision, right? And the vision we decided was simply a church for the broken. There was no call to restoration. It was just a church for the broken. Reason we settled on that was simply because the prevailing image out there in the world, in our culture back then, was that you had to have your crap together before coming to church. Oh, I go to church. People say this. Oh, I need to be good before I come to church, right? And this vision was signaling to the people, no, you don't need to be perfect. That's where the word broken came from. It's kind of a catch-all for you don't have to be perfect to come through our doors, right? And generally, believe it or not, we found that to be very well received by most people. And it was very well received by people who weren't Christian. Like, oh, well, hey, I don't have to have my crap together. The other thing we liked about the vision is more of a tagline, right? And instantly memorizable. Like people came, they like a church for the broken, like, oh my God, I memerized it. There's not like five sentences you got to memorize. So after that, what started happening, and this was really fascinating, was people were coming to church. They were there for a number of years, and they're like, hey, it's a church for the broken. Why are you telling me to get better? And they were like, what?
Sure.
The point is to get better, know? And we thought that was understood because that's implied in the statement. We're a church for the broken, meaning not only do we receive the broken, but we're here to help the broken, right? So we thought that was, but we realized, oh my God, we got to be explicit about this. And so that's where call to restoration kind of came into play. And that was maybe 4 years into the church plant.
I see.
Now, when we planted the two different churches several years later, New Mercy Hackensack and New Mercy Palisades, we decided as a network to keep the same vision, right? Church for the broken, call to restoration. I will say this, though. I did have thoughts when we were planting New Mercy Palisades, like, is it time to evolve it? Because it's been, at this point, 13 years. The culture changes dramatically in 13 years. Is there a way to capture what our DNA is about in a language that's maybe better understood? Which is why I resonate with kind of what this person said. I still personally like the vision, and I think I don't anticipate us changing it anytime soon, right? And part of the reason why I like the vision is because it's actually a perfect encapsulation of what the gospel is. The fact that Jesus came for broken people, and he came to restore them, right? The thing that Jesus says is the sick don't need a physician. The healthy don't need a physician. It's the sick that need a physician.
That's right.
And in that statement, he's almost implying like, if you feel like you're not broken, if you feel like you don't need a doctor, you're not going to come to me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so that's almost like the uncompromising minimum of this particular, of the gospel. Right, and of this vision statement. So that's kind of the history of it, and that's kind of the theology behind it. Yeah.
Bobe, for you, I'd love to get your thoughts on it. I mean, you've spent now upwards of 5 years in this community, right? So that's 5 years of having to reconcile and to have conversations with people and to, on your own, like having to wrestle with the idea of a church for the broken, call to restoration, and putting your hands to a ministry that stands behind that. By the way, I think that's a wonderful. I love it. From a spiritual standpoint, I love it. From a tagline, I love it. I just so much of it I like about the vision of our church. But yeah, Bobe, I'd love to get your thoughts on it. Like how does that hit for you? If I may ask it that way, or any other thoughts?
Yeah.
I like our vision. I like it a lot because I think when you talk about brokenness, there is a level of like sin you're talking about. Because like what broke us, sin did. Right? So I think it brings like an awareness of like, yeah, like you don't got it all together. And that's okay. Because we have a savior who came to restore. Right? And that like, yeah, it perfectly encapsulates what Jesus came to do for us. And like God's plan for us. I think for me personally, like one of the reasons why I came to New Mercy as an intern was because of the vision. I didn't see a lot of churches that explicitly said that they're about restoring people. And as a pastor, how it worked out in my life is I have to learn how to restore my brokenness, how God restores my brokenness, so I can help other people see that aspect of Jesus and experience that, like lead them in that, right? And so like that's also part of the reason why I think I fought so hard for my own personal freedom. Not just, like in like, oh, just getting better mentally, but really like spiritually diving into like, what does it look like to be a restored child of God? I think that's like a really big part of my personal journey and also a journey as a pastor. So yeah, I think, some of the things we do talk about is like, how do we make the restorative aspect more known to people? What can we provide so that our people know that, yeah, you are broken, but you're not just called to be broken. You're called to restoration. So what can we do to help people find that restoration in Christ?
Yeah.
So that's always something that I love seeing, because one of my favorite aspects of Jesus is his redemptive and restorative aspect, right? Trait. So I really, absolutely love our vision.
Yeah.
And I like kind of where you brought it at the end, because part of the purpose of a vision statement is to direct the functioning of the church, like what we're doing. And like you said, hey, we call ourselves the Church for the Broken, call to restoration. We should be doing things, offering people things that lead them toward restoration. I think that's an important thing. One other thing I kind of want to throw in here was the word broken was actually a very intentional word. Like any vision statement, there's a lot of intention that goes into it. And broken was a much more, it's a much softer word than sinner.
Sure.
Right. A church for sinners called the restoration. Yeah. That would be like, wow, that's the epitome of Christianese and repelling people, right? But broken, we thought, captured a little bit more, actually much wider gambit of people, because as Pastor Bobby said, sin leads to brokenness in so many different forms.
Sure.
Right. And we thought that was kind of a bigger umbrella. But what I do find interesting is that there are some people, so many people found that to be very inviting and very open and very kind of inclusive. But I do find it interesting that there may be a subset of people who might find it to be like still too much.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I'm not there yet, and so I can't go to this church.
Yeah.
It's that real. I'm not saying anybody's saying that, but just kind of like, oh, is that possible? That people are feeling like that.
Yeah.
So,
well, to the person's point that brought it up in the first place, there is a conceit in it, right? If you're going to accept the vision, there is a conceit of it. As I said before, like you have to admit that you're broken. And Pastor Key, you said it yourself. It's been 13 years since the inception of the original New Mercy Church, and a lot can happen in 13 years. Yeah. I remember 13 years ago. I still remember that headspace as well. That the place of ministry. Like I still remember the climate of the church and how broken was a wonderful word to use. It was an all-encompassing, all-inviting thing for those of us that were churched, for those of us that struggled under the harder thumb of the previous generation, particularly those of us that grew up under immigrant paradigms of how we do church, right? Whether it's ethnocentric or mono-ethnic churches that we grew up in, right? Like we grew up and our parents, they did a version of Christianity that like we rejected later on. And so in order to get away from that, we still had our churched hearts and our churched minds and our churched ears. And so when we used the word broken 13 years ago, it allowed me to be like, okay, yes, that's better than sinner. Like as a in relation to each other, yes, broken was better than sin. I remember those days, but I think maybe what the person was asking is, in the same way that great care and intentionality was taken to use and to choose the word broken, again, not necessarily a call to action, but just a question.
Yeah.
What word or phrase or whatever nowadays might still hold true to the DNA of our church, that runs parallel along that vision, but doesn't use the word broken? Yeah. Let me also ask this question. As pastors, how do you feel about having to, I want to ask this gently, about like having to bend that portion of your vision statement, for the person that says, I'm not broken.
Yeah.
You know?
That doesn't bother me per se, because the whole point of the church is to always adapt its language so it's comprehensible to the culture in some way, so that people come to Christ, right? Without compromising what we're all about. So it didn't bother me too much, that aspect. But to answer your first question, what word is there? And so here's the thing, right? When you said we chose the word broken because it kind of goes away from the word sinner a little bit, it softens it, right? And that's kind of from within the church, right? But we also chose that word because we wanted us to be, at least a vision statement, to be comprehensible to people outside the church who don't know Christianity, right? They have a concept or an idea of what broken is, which is not perfect. And so they're like, oh, the church, I can come into a church because I'm not perfect. I can still be welcome here, right? And so that's kind of the thinking behind that. And so to try to capture that I almost wonder if part of our understanding of the word broken is because we are so church, we see the way the word broken is conceived of and understood within the Christian world. But I'm wondering if people outside the church, they don't have any of that baggage per se, right? And they see the word broken, if they're just like, it's not that thing.
Yeah.
I'm just curious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let me try to be the loving opposition right now.
Absolutely.
Okay. So here's the hard part for me. When I come to New Mercy, a church for the broken call to restoration, do I have to acknowledge that I am broken in order to, let's say, enjoy the sweetness of the fellowship or the beauty of the worship and the sermon or the bonds of community between brothers and sisters? Like, do I have to admit that? Because I have a little bit of trouble there, because to the churched person, let me say it this way too. To the church person, when a church person says I am broken, that we are. I'm searching for it. It's right there. Repentance is supposed to be a daily thing in the life of the believer. Yes. Okay, that's what we believe, not just as pastors, but as believers. Okay, so when a church person says, I am broken, that is their form of repentance. Or at the very least, it's the gateway that we walk through in order to get to the heart of repentance. That's often how it is perceived in the church. So when a church person hears the word, a church for the broken call to restoration, in a sense, what the word broken does is, this is just a picture of it. What the word broken does is it presents a gateway, It presents a gate for the church person to walk through without judgment.
Yeah.
Right? Because we're all just trying to be better at repentance, aren't we? And so in order to be better at repentance, we live internally, like we internalize the idea that we are broken, not as something that bashes over our head in like condemnation, but it's a simple conceit for those of us that understand that we needed a savior. And so thusly, foundationally, we have to admit that we were broken, or at the very least that we were sinners. Okay. The problem is, that only works well for the churched person. For the person who is not churched, for the person who walks through those doors, they hear a church for the broken and they immediately are forced to, or at the very least, they're immediately confronted with the proposition of like, do you need someone outside of yourself? 13 years ago, that was an easier question to ask than it is now. Why? Because 13 years later, self-help, self-care, self-love, embracing your own identity, embracing your truth, living out your story. It is the celebration of the individual, right? Sometimes it's good. Sometimes it veers away from the truth of the gospel, right? And so, is it not time for the church to make their own conceit, a conceit of their own, when it comes to, let's say, the vision of our church, right? Yeah. I think that's what the loving opposition might ask and say, right? Yeah. Like, you're asking me to make this great conceit that I am broken, but I've done therapy, I've gone to college, I've done my master's degree, I've done everything that I can do to show you that I am good. I'm not all of a sudden going to come to your church and admit that I am not good. And so I wonder if there's room for us to make a conceit of our own.
Yeah. Yeah, I love all of that. I do believe there are probably some people who feel like that, but I also do believe that there are people who come through the church and they see a church for the broken and they're not Christian. They're like, my life is in shambles. I'm broken. And this is a place that seems to welcome me. I think there are people who are kind of like that. But I do believe that there's probably a percentage of people who might understand it to be like, hey, I'm not broken. You know, why do I have to admit myself to be broken to be here? And that's something, if I'm being honest, I have to wrestle with, if I'm being completely honest, because Jesus almost says that in order for you to understand the gospel, you have to get to a place where you understand yourself to be broken. If you don't understand yourself to be broken, then you're not going to even want to be here. You know, so that's kind of the struggle, right? Yeah. And the other struggle is like, at a point, sometimes there are things that are timeless that should stay timeless and things that we can compromise on. So is this one of those things? Right. And that's what I would struggle with. Like, because if you dilute so much to accommodate the culture, you're not different from the culture. Right. You know, and so that's a struggle. Sure. And I've seen some churches dilute it so much that it's just like, oh, okay, it's just a self-help club or something else, you know? And so that's the kind of balance. And this is the intricacy and the difficulty of casting a vision because it has to, as much as possible, stay true to the core of who you are, but at the same time communicate without necessarily offending, but at the same time saying, it's a hard thing to do. So which is why I like this exercise, because I do believe every 10 years we should probably revisit and be like, hey, is this still doing what we think it's doing? Because so where we got this whole idea of a tagline was from Andy Stanley. He's like, you shouldn't have a long vision. It should be like instantly memorized. But I'm like, that makes complete sense. So his original vision for his church was, we're a church for the unchurched. Right. And back maybe like 20 years ago, oh, that's so cool. We're a church for the unchurched. But I look at that, I'm like, that's the dumbest vision I've ever heard. You know what I mean? Like a church for the unchurched. Why do I even want to be churched? You know, like what are you talking about?
Good you think I need the church?
So that was hip and cool. So I completely resonate with maybe there's some thought we can put to this.
Sure.
And I would like, maybe if we don't even change the vision, which I probably don't anticipate doing right now, but is there a way to explain it better or put it out there better so that people can understand it better?
Yeah.
So anyway, that's all kind of a whole bunch of stuff.
No, absolutely. Like we're doing this for a reason. It's
Yeah.
not just some kind of thing to fill the minutes of our podcast. It's like we're trying here.
Yeah.
We're trying to signal that we're trying, right? Like, Bobe, I'm sorry, go ahead.
And this is a good conversation to have. And I would say like people should feel free to have this conversation, but also to come in and understand the internal logic as to why we landed where we landed. And kind of this dialogue, I think, could result in maybe a sticking with it, or maybe, hey, we can kind of evolve it a bit.
Sure.
Who knows?
Sure.
So.
Yeah. Bobe, I'd love to get your thoughts. I don't want to kind of hog all of the minutes here.
I think if you ask me, is there another word to replace broken?
Sure.
Sinner.
Bobe went there.
She strikes again, ladies and gentlemen.
No, you know what it is because I think if we keep compromising on that piece, we only get half of the goodness of God. I really believe that.
Yeah.
And if self-help is working for you, then what do you want with Jesus? Meaning like, are you just trying to go to heaven? Is it that you're looking for a ticket to heaven, or so that you're like covering your tracks? Do you know what I mean?
Sure. Well, okay.
I mean, no. I'm just a very like 그냥. Very like.
I love it.
brain.
I love it.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna press. I'm gonna press for a second. Loving opposition. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Isn't it conceit enough that I walk through the doors of the church? Like,
So then, what are you saying when you walk into the church? Like what is it that you're trying to?
Sure.
You
Yeah.
know?
So, like, why does changing one word in the tagline? Why does changing one word in the vision all of a sudden take away from the DNA or the power of the gospel? Like, why? It's a tagline at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Like it's something to catch people. Like,
That's true. I see.
How much does a tagline mean to you? Because if it means that much, and if you're putting that much of your hope in a tagline, that might be something to reconsider, right? So if it pains you to use the word to even think about changing the word broken that much, then isn't that, first of all, isn't that your own brokenness, right? That's me being the loving opposition. Number two, it's this idea of, listen, I walk through the doors of your church, and you got, like, I'm supposed to walk through the doors of your church, it alone being my conceit that I needed church or that I wanted church. Okay. I walked through the doors of your church. Secondly, I sat through your worship. I sat through your sermon. I engage in fellowship. I do everything. But now you're asking me to make this conceit of I'm broken. I don't even know Jesus. Right? And so the question becomes this. Pastor Key, you said a church for the unchurched. It sounds stupid now, right? It does. It sounds stupid now.
It's cool in the 70s.
But we're still asking that question. Are we a church for the churched, or are we a church for the unchurched? Are we a church? Do we want to de-church people? Do we want to church them up real good? Like, I'm being a little facetious, but not that much. Like,
right.
Hardcore, like, reformed, hide under the shadow of the cross, the gospel, you must be gospel explicit and centered. Like, these people might look at what is commonly referred to as secret sensitive churches and like look down their noses at them, and it's like, ooh, it's the Hillsong, it's the Bethel problem, it's the idea of making church man-centered as opposed to God-centered, right? Like we've been asking this question for generations and generations, not just 13 years, like 13 generations. We've been asking this question of like, who is the church for? Where does the conceit need to be in order for us to capture somebody's heart? Right? Does it have to be with their mind? Does it have to be with their words? Or could it just be with their body as they walk through the doors of our church? Does it pain you that much to change the tagline? And you know, like in that dinner, I threw out some examples just to like just test some things out. I was like, okay, what about like a church and community looking for Jesus? Welcome to New Mercy, a church and community looking for Jesus. Welcome to New Mercy, imperfect people looking for a perfect Jesus, right? Like, why does it hurt to use? Well, like, why does it hurt to change the word broken so much?
Yeah, I don't think it hurts.
Yeah.
But I think now I'm kind of understanding much more clearly kind of what you're getting at.
Sure.
Like, you know, it's just a word, and it's just a vision statement, a tagline. If it's getting in the way, do we need it? Can we change it?
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's a fair question to ask. You
Yeah.
know, and as long as we know it's not going to compromise what we're actually doing.
Yeah.
You know, as long as that's the case, I think that's definitely a question worth visiting.
Yeah. Hang on, I kind of got beside myself, and I was supposed to press Boba a little bit.
Okay, yeah.
Like, Boba, this is loving opposition, right?
Yeah.
And so, and so, help me, like, interact with that person that says, "Isn't it enough that I walk through the doors of your church?" And why is the conceit that I'm making that important to you? Like, if God's going to work on my heart, right? Why does it matter that much?
I think if we're trying to stay true or stay close to the inception of the vision, then I think it does matter what word we use. Yeah. Now, I think the hope is that we're not just keeping, like, just collecting bodies. We're wanting to see transformation, right? And so I guess you're right in the sense that, like, it doesn't really matter what word we use as long as we continue to share, like, God's love and the transforming work of the cross.
Sure.
Right? Yeah. But if we're getting like to the specifics of this vision line, then I think that is something to like kind of press and say like this is not just a nice tagline, but this encapsulates what we believe the gospel to do. Yeah. Not just the broken, because that's only one aspect. So if you're hung up on the one aspect, then you're missing the rest as well, right?
Sure.
That would be kind of like my pushback.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
To that person. So, I mean, yeah. At the end of the day, like, I think every church wants to see the same thing. We want to see Jesus change lives through our church, right? And whether it's for the unchurched or for the broken, like, at the end of the day, I think we all have to know that, like, we all have to admit, and as we walk in, we are admitting that we are sinners, that we are, like, we need something besides ourselves to help us or save us or whatever other word you want to put in there, right? And like, that is the conceit that we're making when we walk in through the doors, right? So it doesn't necessarily have to attach specifically to the word broken, but we are all coming in along the same lines. So then what does it matter that the word is broken?
Sure.
You know?
Sure.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if the word is something that we get caught up or somebody gets caught up in, right? The hope is like we'll be able to explain it. And they would, because at the end of the day, people have different kind of feelings that they receive as they come to this word or this vision statement. And we all just gotta be communicating with one another to get to that same place. You know, if it's repelling, then hey, you know, that's not what we mean by it. You know, this and that. I would like to do that conversation. You know, this is interesting because it just shows the power of language. On the one hand, it seems like it's just a word, but then it's not just a word because it's affected somebody. You know what I mean? And so this is why, as much as it seems like it's just a vision statement, it's also fairly powerfully shaping words for us in our church. And so I don't know, it's tough. It's a hard thing to tackle, and it's just the complexities of the fact that we have a billion different people coming at the church and seeing it in different ways. And I don't know, like at one point, you know, let's say I preach a message and they're like, oh, I'm not ready to hear something like that. Should I not preach that anymore? You know what I mean?
Right,
so that's kind of the difficulty that we're running into here. And so that's the debate is like, is there wiggle room here or not?
Yeah.
And what does that mean?
Yeah.
You know, that's tough.
Yeah, for sure. To that end then, and because we're getting pretty long, the conversation was good, but it did take maybe a little bit more time. To that end then, and to find a landing point, I wanted to do this, and this is the last thing on the agenda that I had originally proposed at the beginning of this podcast. I have loved doing the podcast the way that we've done it. We've gotten to, build our rapport. We've gotten to know each other better. We've gotten to connect with an audience, however big or small that they may be, all this stuff, right? But lately I've been wondering if there isn't more that we can do with the podcast, not necessarily in impact and in influence, but just in scope, right? That maybe there's maybe a little bit more that we could be doing with this podcast. At the beginning of this journey, 30 something episodes ago, I talked about the idea of possibly taking a stab at more topical things, topical issues, right? There are so many ways in which the church right now in America has failed its people, and not necessarily from a theology or scholarly perspective, but from a pastoral perspective. The idea of helping our people make sense of the world that they live in, the ever-changing world that they live in. I'm not asking us to take political stances or to make decisions or anything like that, but in the same way that we just asked a question and had a conversation, I'm wondering if there's something more that we can do with this podcast. So what I am asking, proposing, kind of putting out there is that starting next week, and we'll probably do it slowly, and we'll probably do it, inch by inch. But starting next week, I'm going to start to introduce a few more topical things into the conversations of our podcast. And these are going to be things that might not necessarily be really close to our particular community, but in some way, shape, or form, they matter to believers, right? And I'm wondering if we could, in the same way, have a conversation about those things. Today, with our conversation about our vision, our tagline, I don't know that the heart of it was to necessarily come to a decision, but it was to show that Christians and pastors can talk about it, especially the pastors that love the tagline so much. Like even we are happy to talk about it. I think that's what I want to do with those topical conversations. I don't necessarily need us to make decisions or stances or sound bites or whatever. But for the purposes of this podcast and for the good of our people, I want to model how conversations can be had. For some of the easier things, for some of the harder things, for the things that don't have clear-cut answers, for the things that do but still like upset people very much so, right? In the same way that we love talking about the sermons and kind of like what goes into them and the nuts and bolts behind them, I want to take that care and apply them to things like, I don't know, one day LGBTQ issues or abortion, or more theologically minded questions like, who is God? Why do I need salvation? Things like spiritual formation questions like, how do I even craft a rhythm of meditation and prayer? Like, I want to do more topical things. Yeah. And so that's my proposition.
Yeah, and like theological questions.
Absolutely.
No, we gotta study
like
for this.
Predestination, you know.
That's absolutely. That is an evergreen thing that always comes up to all believers.
Yeah.
Okay.
Of the ones you listed, I think predestination is the easier one. Let's save the hard ones for later.
Yes,
okay?
yes.
Can you just let us know before so I can study?
Well, yeah, no, for sure. I'm going to be working hard to maybe set a calendar of conversation.
I don't offend nobody. I mean, I might offend somebody.
But I think if we're going to be, faithful in what we believe, but also faithful in our posture of humility, we also need to open the door to the fact that maybe we will, in our best efforts of not trying to offend people, will still offend people, right? Yeah. But it's not about offending or not offending. It's about, to the person watching, to the person listening, I want them to see Christians. I want them to see pastors have a version of these conversations that is different from the ones that they see depicted on their social media or depicted on, news websites, CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, whatever you subscribe to. Like, I want them to see a version of these conversations that are different from all of those other things. Yeah. And in so doing, maybe they themselves are spurred on to have conversations themselves with other people. That's the ultimate true heart of it.
Yeah, I like that. I want to have thoughtful conversations, and we're not going to have all the answers.
Sure.
And I think that's okay.
Sure.
As long as we model it well. Spiritual gifts, by the way, is something we should talk about too.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yep. We'll talk about as much, as many things as possible.
Oh, I'm getting excited.
Yeah. So that's coming down the pike.
Is video gaming okay?
We laugh at it, but I know a lot of parents that would love for us to model a conversation like that, Yeah. So that is coming down the line. If you're listening, if you're watching, and if you made it this far, we really thank you. We don't take it lightly that you make us part of your weekly rhythms. At the very least, I don't. To the people that listen every week, and you get something out of this, thank you so much. Just know that down the line, we want to add more to the scope of this podcast and these conversations that allows you to maybe do your walk with the Lord and your finding of community for yourself to do that a little bit better. So, you should have all expectation, but also show us some grace because we might not say the right things sometimes.
If I offend you with my stupidity, I apologize in advance.
Yeah. Ditto.
No.
Yeah. In any case, that'll be where we sort of land this plane. Thank you so much for listening. It has been a long one, but it has been a good one. We hope that it was good for you as well. We'll be back next week with the new version of our podcast, slightly altered version, I should say. We'll be back next week with another new episode of NMPC Plus. In the meantime, we hope that you are blessed, and this is NMPC Plus signing off for now.